Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for joining us. The U.S. is now 4 days into its war against Iran, jointly with the Israeli military and without congressional approval. Casualties so far include some U.S. service members and hundreds of Iranians, including the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, ruled for 36 years and built Iran into a powerful anti-U.S. adversary while suppressing opposition at home with digital surveillance, mass arrests, and lethal force. Following the U.S.'s strike on Iran, the conflict has spread to other Middle East countries, including Lebanon, Cyprus, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, leading the International Committee of the Red Cross to say civilian lives across the region are in grave danger. The Trump administration has sent mixed messages over its basis for attacking Iran, with President Donald Trump on one hand urging the Iranian people to take care and take over their government, while on the other insisting this war was not about a regime change, but about nuclear and ballistic missile capability. Listen to these comments by President Trump yesterday. We do have a clip of the president that we will play for you.
An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat to the Middle East, but also to the American people. Our country itself would be under threat, and it was very nearly under threat.
And we also have a clip for you from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Let's hear that now.
This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it. We hope the Iranian people take advantage of this incredible opportunity. President Trump has been clear, now is your time. To Iranian security forces, choose wisely.
And just last night, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Israel's determination to attack Iran and the concern U.S. troops would be attacked in response prompted the preemptive strike. We'll start today's show talking about the war with Iran, including how we got here and what happens next. Later in the show, at around 9:30, we'll talk about calls to close Burke Lakefront Airport with IdeaStream's freelance city planning reporter Steve Litt. It'll give us a primer ahead of our Sound of Ideas community tour happening tomorrow night at the airport. And we'll wrap up today learning about Akron's last TV newsroom that shut down 30 years ago in a piece from our senior arts reporter, Kabir Bhatia. That'll be around 9:50 a.m. And now, joining me in the studio to talk about the U.S. war with Iran is law professor Avi Kovar, the director of the Institute for Global Security Law and Policy at Case Western Reserve University. Avi, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And if you're listening or watching The Sound of Ideas and you have questions or thoughts about the U.S.-Iran conflict, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org or message us on Instagram. We're at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Avi, from an international law perspective, the Trump administration worked with Israel's government to enact these military strikes, but didn't get approval from Congress. So are these attacks a violation of American law or maybe even international law?
They are a violation of both U.S. law and international law. They're a violation of international law because they crossed a particular threshold which prohibits any violation of the territorial integrity of a state. That's Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. That's the closest thing to Holy Writ we have in international law. The only exceptions for that are when there is an armed attack, an imminent armed attack. We can certainly get into the contentions as to whether there was a threat posed by Iranian nuclear in potential for nuclear enrichment and the like. But I think it's safe to say by any clear measure it doesn't meet the legal threshold of imminence. That alone, the violation of international law, would mean it also violates U.S. law. But needless to say, under the U.S. legal system that we have, as I think every seventh grader knows, it is Congress that has the authority to declare war or authorize war. There has been nothing of that sort here. While there are certain exceptions when the president can unilaterally authorize force, those conditions do not appear to be met here. They have to be both in the national interest and meet what effectively is war in a constitutional sense. So that is the nature, scope, and duration of hostilities short of a war. Safe to say this is a war. President Trump has declared that these are extensive combat operations. We understand this is the biggest marshaling of force in the Middle East in 20 some odd years. This is a war by any sense of the word. and it requires congressional authorization.
So is there any recourse for that, for this violation of international law and also American law?
This is, of course, one of the shortcomings of international law, to be sure. A state such as the United States can wield quite powerful control by virtue of being so powerful. It really is up to the public. It's up to Congress. It's up to the international community to be out there criticizing. Congress can, of course, act here. And they have been asleep at the switch for decades, really, in this space, but certainly during this presidency and during at least these first few days of the conflict.
Now, you mentioned that the concept of whether imminent threats were actually a reality is debatable. So can we talk about that? Does that justification hold weight?
I don't think it does. Not the least of the reasons might well be the Operation Midnight Hammer, when the United States and Israel attacked Iranian nuclear capabilities in June, and by President Trump's own account, obliterated those capabilities. So at the very least, right, even if indeed there is still an Iranian intent to develop nuclear weapons, enrich uranium to the grade that it can be weaponized, they're far, far from there. And so then certainly don't meet that imminent standard that's required.
Let's talk about some of the other reasons that have been tossed around as justifications for this, because there have been several. What do you think about some of those reasonings that were shared?
Sure. One of the other reasons that President Trump mentioned in his Truth Social account, and I'll note not in some sort of presentation to Congress, not even at the State of the Union, was that there's ballistic missile weapon capability. Those two, in terms of posing an imminent threat to the United States, fall far from meeting that threshold. By some accounts, Iran does have nuclear capability, ballistic missile capability to reach Europe, certainly to reach Israel. But to the United States, far from that. I think prognostications are at best by the year 2035, Iran could have that capability. Again, that does not meet the imminent threshold.
We have some calls coming in now. We have a call from Don in North Royalton. Don, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you. I was wondering, for one thing, Iran was pursuing a peaceful nuclear energy plan and was not pursuing weapons, so there's no justification on that count. And secondly, we understand Israel has a nuclear bomb and has never been held to account and signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So if you could speak to that, thank you.
Avi, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, Iran has claimed that they have civilian intent, peaceful intent to use their nuclear capabilities. I think there is intelligence that suggests a dual or hybrid motivation for Iran is there. So certainly there can be peaceful uses, and yet I think there's general agreement that Iran has also had more offensive intentions in terms of weaponizing. With respect to the issue of Israel, yes, it's generally agreed that Israel does have nuclear weapons. They're one of, I think, about 9 states that do have nuclear weapons. I don't believe they've signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but again, certainly that remains a concern. There are 5 states that are recognized within that treaty to have those weapons, but certainly there is a desire, and the intent of that treaty is that there should be denuclearization of all states.
And we heard Marco Rubio saying last night that part of the reason that this happened when it did is because Israel was planning an attack on Iran. So can you talk about that as a possible motivation for the U.S. doing this here?
Yeah, I mean, that's also a frighteningly problematic, I think, bootstrapping rationale and requires a certain level of contingencies. So by virtue of Israel launching an attack and then the presumed response by Iran to attack Israel, that somehow triggers the United States' ability to act. I think there's a number of steps there that make it quite attenuated and make it very hard to make the argument that that's in self-defense.
We've got a call now from Bob in Cleveland. Bob, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Thank you. I wish you had more time to take calls, but isn't it interesting that we changed the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, and we're acting upon it? And isn't it true that we have a leader who is a convicted felon? Has everybody forgotten that? And some people say he's a con man. And, one other thing, if I can, it's Well, that's enough, I guess. But we controlled Venezuela with war, and they have a high oil reserve. And now we're trying to control Iran with their high oil reserve, and we have Iraq's high oil reserve, and we're war friends with Saudi Arabia, and they have one of the world's largest oil reserves. So, in other words, we control the world's oil now.
Thank you for calling in, Bob. Bob brought up Venezuela there, Avi, so I want to talk about that now. This is the second time this year that President Trump has toppled a country's leadership, first kidnapping the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, and that also happened without congressional approval. So can we talk about the times the U.S. has intervened in changing leadership in other countries and historically what's happened there?
Yeah, I mean, needless to say, it's a worrisome precedent that President Trump is setting now twice. We've seen this in just a matter of months. The belligerent calls that he made, actually even subsequent to Venezuela before addressing Iran, was seeking, of course, Greenland. But in terms of general regime change of sorts, we have seen this, certainly in the U.S. history. Panama was an example that came up quite notably in the case of Venezuela as a precedent, indeed, that the U.S. Justice Department cited. That was in 1989. And we've seen regime change even in Iran. The United States played a role in the 1953 coup there, which again, is important for us to remember that the consequences that follow from a war such as this, one that doesn't seem to have been particularly thought out or planned, given the varying rationales that the government has provided in just the last few days, raises concerns not just of the consequences in the immediate next few days and weeks, but even the years down the line when it's not well thought out. And so one can certainly draw a pretty direct line between that coup in 1953 to the 1979 revolution and the state of affairs in Iran for the last half century.
We have an email from Anthony now. Anthony writes in, "The facts are that everything the administration is seeking was already in place when Iran signed an agreement with the Obama administration on a deal. Trump tore up the deal, said he obliterated the impending threat, now started a war." Anthony says, keep the facts at the forefront. So can you talk about what the Trump administration did with that deal that was signed under the Obama administration?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that came about in 2015. That was a set of agreements that also involved the European states and required Iran to give up various weapons, agree to certain limitations, agree to inspections. That went, I think, by many accounts, successfully for a number of years, though I think people, maximalists who are concerned that Iran should be able to have any stockpile of enriched uranium, had concerns. And when President Trump came in, he did indeed, as the emailer writes, tore up the deal. And so that's where we are right now. Indeed, President Trump has, I think, never really walked back, I think, some of his belligerent intents, notwithstanding the fact that some people thought he was being elected to take on sort of an isolationist stance. And so we've seen these acts of aggression again and again. I think we're left to wonder, what were those negotiations over the last months? Was that just theater, or was there a belief that really some kind of deal could get achieved?
We have a call now from Jeff in North Royalton. Jeff, welcome back to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Good morning. Back in the fall of 1979, my ship was part of the response to the taking of the American embassy in Tehran. We spent 83 days sealing off the Gulf of Oman and keep an eye on the Iranians. We saw the Iranians once, and they ran as soon as we lit them up with the radar. On the other hand, what we did see every day, multiple times a day, were Russians. Why are we not talking about the Russians in all this, particularly given the importance of Iran to the Ukrainian-Russian war at present?
Jeff, thank you for calling in and sharing that experience with us. Avi, do you have a comment?
It's certainly a very fair question. We've seen an act of aggression by Russia that's gone on for years. It had been a significant part of U.S. policy to try and blunt that aggression, using sanctions, providing weapons to the Ukrainians. We've seen halting efforts, I suppose, on the part of the Trump administration to achieve peace, kind of inconsistent statements all around. Listen, there's a great concern. President Trump, really kind of was elected on a slogan, really, of making America great again, focusing on the economy and internally. And instead, we've seen a president focused in a seemingly scattershot fashion all across the globe. Whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Greenland, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's now Iran, and as the caller suggests, a level of inattention, it would appear, to the situation in Russia. I also fear, to the extent that there was any sort of moral high ground that the United States could assert in terms of criticizing states for violating the territorial integrity of another, it becomes much harder for the United States to make that assertion in the wake of Venezuela, in the wake of Iran. And one wonders what China is thinking as they consider, following their ambitions to take Taiwan. What leg does the United States have to stand on and criticize that?
Mm. We have a call now from Mark in Columbus. Mark, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Thank you. When I served in the United States Air Force, I was on a crew that was trained to map out the fallout from a nuclear missile hitting any city in our country. So if the Iranians were to develop a ballistic missile enough with a warhead on it to drop it right down the center of Cleveland, you'd have about a 30-mile radius where absolutely everything would be fried. 5 miles beyond that, you'd have a 100% death rate from radiation heat and fallout. You go out another 25, 30 miles, and you're looking at a 50 to 70% death rate. Because the winds move from west to east, the radiation fallout from a Cleveland nuclear missile will go all the way to Buffalo, New York, and people would die all along that line. So if you don't think our president's doing something to protect our country from this ever happening, people are crazy. And the mullahs in Iran are not elected people. They're feverish religious people willing to die for their Allah to drop a missile on our country. That's what I have to say.
Thank you for calling in, Mark. We do appreciate that. Can we talk about the long-range possibility that I think Mark was bringing up there?
Yeah, listen, no one should ever minimize the harm that a nuclear weapon can do. But the reality is, and particularly because of Operation Midnight Hammer in June, Iran is farther from being able to weaponize uranium and certainly then attach that to a missile and then certainly that to launch and attack Cleveland in Ohio. That's years from now. And U.S. intelligence and indeed various interactions by the U.S. military, interruptions of Iranian efforts together with the Israelis, keep those concerns at bay. The full-scale war that we're seeing here, again, if we consider the standard, if we care about our legal system, right, requires imminence and it requires the authorization of Congress. So even if you believe that President Trump is right, we should certainly want the rule of law to be followed here, and it's not being followed. With respect to the Iranian people, by most accounts, you're talking about a population, 90 million people, where I think by most accounts, 80% of that population is critical of the leadership, was critical of the leadership of the Ayatollah Khomeini. They want freedom. They're a peace-loving people. And there is a lot to be said for that society. The concern here is, and it sort of is left as an afterthought, and you have Secretary of War Pete Hegseth making reference to the fact that regime change is not the objective, but it might be a collateral consequence. The real concern here, and President Trump seemed to be motivated in some level by the protests back in December and January, is are we endangering the people that much more? Again, it goes to the planning and process that doesn't seem to be in place here. Are we setting up the people for a new state and freedom, human rights and a democratic institution, or are we setting them up for a bloodbath? It's not clear that the United States has their backs in the true sense of the word.
Mm. If you're just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about the U.S.-Iran war that has 4 days in now. If you have a comment or a question, you can call us at 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org. And we do know, as we were kind of starting to get the discussion to at this point, it is a question, what could happen to the Middle East region? The State Department is urging Americans to leave 14 Middle East countries. We know there are people are being told to flee, embassies are being closed. So what is the concern there as we hear about what's happening here? We know the president has said he expects fighting to continue for 4 to 5 weeks, but has basically said, hands off. It's the people's opportunity in Iran to do what they want to do at this moment.
Yeah, again, I mean, I think, I would be foolish to predict what will follow. We're obviously seeing the violence spreading. What the Iranians will do in terms of strategically, will they use many of their munitions now? Are they holding them, rationing them for various purposes? Are they going to reach out to wherever they think the most vulnerable locations are in the region? I would hazard a guess that yes. And so we're going to see thousands of lives lost, Iranian lives, but lives of many of the other regional powers. And we're going to see American lives lost, to be sure. We've already seen, I believe, at least 6. And the administration has assured us that we will see more, tragically. Again, the concern is that in any war, there is unpredictability and there is a loss of life. I want to emphasize, our legal system ensures that there is a process by which this is discussed and thought out. And I think the real fear I have is that this administration has not thought things out. It is acting rashly. It is acting undemocratically. It is acting illegally. It is up to the public. It is up to the Congress. It is up to the international community to speak up about this and have their voice heard. Someone made reference to President Trump's background, whether it was being a convicted felon, a con man, as the language suggested. The public voted him in. Right? There was nothing was hidden in terms of his background and his personality and the like. And presidents have a tremendous amount of power, but there are checks in the system, and it calls for the public and, again, the legislature to act on that.
Let's talk about the killing of the supreme leader of Iran. He'd been in power since 1989. Some Iranians do grieve his death, but others are celebrating he had been ordering mass killings of protesters as recently as in January. In recent months, Trump had talked about Iran stopping the deadly crackdown on protests. Is there any human rights argument to be made for this action by the U.S.?
Well, I think certainly as a sympathetic human response, I am not crying tears over his death. He was an oppressive leader, a despotic leader. Our legal system, though, does not allow states to act unilaterally, even in the name of such human rights intervention, without there being Security Council authorization. The United States could have, in theory, sought that. I don't believe they would have received it, given objections likely from Russia and China. But they didn't do that here. And then, frankly, I'm fairly cynical about any motivations on the human rights front from the United States. And indeed, they have said regime change is not their motivation. And again, there does not appear to be any sort of planning, aligning, working with opposition groups within Iran. The motivation appears here to be, a vainglorious attempt at deposing the leadership and framing this as an argument about nuclear weapons deterrence when there is simply not the basis for that.
We've got a call now from John in Lima. John, welcome to The Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. From the Iranian standpoint, the thing I was asking myself is, why wouldn't you just buy the nuclear warhead from, say, Pakistan or North Korea? Just buy it rather than put yourself on the world stage.
Thank you for the question, John. Avi, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to that entirely. I mean, we know that certainly other states have engaged in efforts to do so. I think there were work with scientists from other countries trying to obtain such intelligence. But, be that as it may, where we were efforts at a variety of nuclear locations to develop and enrich uranium. And again, as I've said, knowing where this was located, the United States and Israel have targeted so many of these locations and seem to have significant significantly depleted and diminished those resources. So again, in terms of there being any sort of imminent threat, it seems not to have risen to that standard.
We have an email now, and then that'll segue into a question from a caller. Mark from Hudson writes in, Clinton and Albright also had a very similar deal with North Korea. Ended up just funding and propping up a regime that was on its last legs, and they cheated and got nukes anyway, speaking about North Korea. So Mark shares that comment, which leads us to a call from Jay in Canton. Jay, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Yes. If, Field Marshal von Bonespurs is worried about a threat. Hello?
Hi, Jay. We have you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. If Field Marshal von Bonespurs, our leader, if he's so worried about a threat from nuclear weapons, shouldn't we be going to war with North Korea?
Thank you for the comment, Jay. Avi, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the concern about North Korea is an instructive one. In some arguments is that now that North Korea does in fact have the nuclear weapons capability, that they are not a legitimate opponent in war. That is to say, the United States doesn't want to engage with a nuclear power, that it has a certain deterrent effect. And to the other person's then point, action needed to be taken so that Iran would not become the next North Korea. Certainly while the past can be instructive and other situations are useful, it seems that there are certainly important distinctions. Again, I feel like a bit of a broken record here, but the United States and Israel acted in June and significantly diminished the capability. So all intelligence assessments have indicated that Iran was not close to a nuclear weapon, that the threat is being overstated, and that together with negotiations and diplomacy might have indeed achieved a goal that would have resulted in Iran never becoming another North Korea.
If you're just joining us now on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about the U.S. war in Iran, and we are going to continue this conversation. We're getting a lot of calls and emails, so we'll take a quick break now, and we'll be back with more in just a moment here on The Sound of Ideas. Thanks for staying with us here on The Sound of Ideas. We are talking about the U.S. war in Iran, and we have global law security expert Avi Cover with us from Case Western Reserve University. If you want to be a part of the conversation, you can call us at 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org. And we'll start with a call from Charles in Canton. Charles, welcome to The Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. I was just curious as to comments regarding the public statements from the adjacent Arab states since the start of this war.
Okay. Avi, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, certainly, I'm not sure if Charles has a particular statement in mind. I think one of the concerns that has been expressed by a number of these states was that Iran, in response to the attacks by the United States and Israel, lashed out at states like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE. These states had not engaged in any action against Iran. And so they are understandably upset. And I imagine right now the United States' primary concern is making sure that those states do not start using their own forces to engage in hostilities and making this a more greater and wider conflagration.
We talked a bit earlier about the motivation for this attack, which the administration has shared different things throughout the course of these 4 days as the war has got underway. One of the things that was shared from Marco Rubio was the fact that an attack by Israel was imminent, and there was a thought that that might lead to an attack that would require the U.S. to get involved. And that takes us to a call from Iva in Garrettsville. Iva, welcome to The Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. It's my opinion, and has been for some time now, that the United States is acting at the behest of Russia and Israel. We are pursuing their goals rather than what would make sense for us. We did not do anything but to help out Ukraine, as it should have been 4 years ago. And we are basically carrying out attacks against Iran, who was not our enemy, but a concern to Israel.
Thank you
That's
for
what I think about that.
Thank you for the comment, Iva. What do you think about Iva's thoughts there that we are acting at the behest of other countries?
Yeah, I think the United States certainly has an incredibly strong alliance with Israel. And so to the point of Marco Rubio's comments, would come to the defense of Israel. But the United States has decided interests in the Middle East well apart from Israel. They have military bases throughout. They have invested significantly, certainly in the Iraq War as a prominent example where the United States went to war, not for, it would appear, any interests that had any relationship to Israel. So the United States has those interests there, and Iran has certainly over the years demonstrated a bellicosity toward the United States, both through supporting proxies that attacked the United States Marine base, most prominently in Lebanon, but throughout many years. And indeed, they refer to the United States as Great Satan and Israel as Little Satan. But certainly there is a relationship, a nearly lockstep relationship between the United States and Israel on many policy issues in the Middle East, and it would appear also with respect to Iran.
Let's go back to the history of the relationship between the United States and Iran for a second. You talked about Iran labeling America Great Satan, and that was something that came after the U.S. was involved in the coup in the 1950s, where that was a friendly relationship. So how did it get to a point where there was an anti-U.S. sentiment in Iran?
Yeah, I mean, in 1953, the coup, I mean, in many ways, if you want to talk about at the behest of any state, it was the United States acting at the behest of the United Kingdom, which had significant interests in Iran and was concerned about Iranian efforts to nationalize the oil, which again might sound like a similar callback to matters in Venezuela. And so the United States was involved in that coup and helped ensure that the Shah stay in power, who in many respects was an oppressive leader and was seen as, certainly in the perspective of many Iranians, as a puppet of sorts. This led to plenty of draconian leadership on the part of the Shah in Iran, and you saw over the years a significant, both in terms of communist uprising, but more prominently then, of course, the radical Shiite clerics that result, of course, most famously in the embassy taking in Iran and the hostages, American hostages taken that went for well over a year. And so, ever since then, since 1979, where you've had the Iranian Ayatollahs in power, there has been an ever worsening, or really on a constant burn, of a negative relationship between Iran and the United States.
Let's talk about what the president has said about predicting 4 to 5 weeks of fighting. We have some examples to look back historically. The war on Afghanistan, for example, that was predicted to be a very short action in Afghanistan, ended up being 20 years. The United States didn't get out of Afghanistan until 2021. So what do you think about this 4 to 5 week timeline?
Yeah, I mean, it's striking the president has mentioned that, and I think has maybe already walked back a little or given himself some leeway. I think he's made clear there would be no ground troops, but I believe I saw comments by Secretary Rubio suggesting that could be possible. Look, I think war is very hard to predict. And again, with the lack of foresight and planning that appears present here, that it may be very difficult to stay to any sort of deadline like that. And certainly, as you note, wars can become quite intractable and last decades, regardless of the intentions. Certainly, President Trump seems to have made this a hallmark of the way he operates, to really try and sort of, grab and go, as Venezuela is the model that I think he wants to follow. But again, as many wise policy advisors have noted and commenters have noted, this is not Venezuela. These do not seem to be the same objectives and operations. I certainly hope for a short conflict. This is something I do hope the president would be right about. But again, I think wars have a way of overcoming anyone's prophecies.
We have a call now from Christian in Cleveland. Christian, welcome to The Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me on. Just to piggyback on that last idea, usually the president is very short term in his objective. He's in and out, and I just feel like so many callers who have said before, this harkens back to Iraq, and what we start now is just going to go on, and I just don't see the 4 to 5 week time gap being sufficient. I just think this is going to awaken sleeper cells and opposition groups in Lebanon and in the Gulf, and I just think this is going to go on, and it's really I think a lot of Americans are afraid of what starts now with the incompetence in this administration. I just don't think there's any depth of knowledge or wisdom or experience to understand what they're starting is just going to go on and on. If you could just comment on that, please.
I share a lot of the caller's fears, and I think we really just don't know. You're right. The president does seek to try and close things off, and seems to have, as some people would sort of derisively suggest, a short attention span, and will want to pull out. Even if that occurs, right? Even in that scenario where American forces are pulled back, as the caller suggests, what has then been unleashed? And so, what happens in Iran? Again, there doesn't seem to have been a plan for the day after. Is there a civil war? Is there a power grab? Is there a revolution? Any of those may not make nuclear stockpiles any more safe, and indeed, you could be faced with a situation that's far more dangerous. We could see a Syria play out in Iran, but yet with a population of 90 million and significant weaponry. So I guess the real concern is: has this been done thoughtfully? Every reason suggests not. Has it been done legally? We know that it has not. And so, what policy implications are going to follow? I think there's every reason to be worried. I can be hopeful, but I should be thoughtful and wise in terms of predicting what will occur.
For anyone who's just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about the U.S. war in Iran. If you want to give us a call with a comment or a question, that number is 866-578-0903. We do have global security law and policy expert from Case Western Reserve University, Avi Cover, with us, who can help with any comments or questions that come our way. Again, that number, 866-578-0903, and you can also email us at soi@ideastream.org. We have an email now in from Ren. Ren writes, I'm planning a trip to England and Scotland in June. Should I reconsider? I have to decide quickly and can switch to a trip to Canada if necessary. Avi, what do you think about that?
Oh boy, Ren. I guess I would urge you to pursue your plans, but maybe make sure you have travel insurance.
Travel insurance, not a bad idea in all scenarios, certainly, and a lot of uncertainty right now. We have a call now from Patty in Youngstown. Patty, welcome to The Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm calling in reference to the cause of the war that's been happening. It says in Time, as many as 30,000 people have been killed in the streets of Iran, and that's coming from the officials of the country's Ministry of Health. Iran is reporting about 7,000, but the true numbers are well over, they're saying 35,000 of the protesters, and a lot of people. They've just been slaughtering them. They've been taking them out. They've abandoned ambulances, and they're taking them out by the semi-truckfuls when it was happening. That was early in January, most of it.
Thank you for sharing that context with us, Patty. Getting back to the conversation we were having earlier about the humanitarian issues that were happening. What do you think the mood is like in Iran now?
Yeah, I mean, by all accounts, and I think people have seen some of the footage, there has been celebration, discreet ones, because again, there remain plenty of powerful Revolutionary Guard forces and Basij forces. So, this is still not a safe state for those individuals. But as the caller suggests, by most human rights groups' accounts, we're talking about tens of thousands of lives of ordinary people of various religious and ethnic groups. People who just want to live open life. So it's a tragedy, and so I think those people are hopeful that this change in leadership could mean something for them. What I remain, again, to repeat, somewhat cynical about, though, is are these really the motivations of the U.S. government right now? Are they going to be there for the people to help them during those troubling times? There's every reason to be somewhat skeptical that the Trump administration is motivated by human rights, given that they've pulled out of every imaginable human rights instrument associated with the United Nations and the like. They have never spoken about a policy that's led by human rights. And indeed, they've walked back any sort of notion that part of the reason for this war is regime change.
So let's talk about that possibility of regime change, if it is in fact a motivation, which is unclear. Who would replace Khamenei? Is there something that's kind of coming up to the top, or what do you think there?
Yeah, I mean, the various accounts there, partly relying on President Trump's various statements, really run the gamut. Some people have spitball a scenario where you have folks who are part of the clerical and Revolutionary Guard leadership, but are more moderate. It's a very relative term here, but who might be open to sort of going back to the negotiation table and maybe agreeing to zero uranium, which seems to have been the final position that President Trump articulated. That may be a last grasp for power and retaining some sort of authority. I don't think the Iranian people will be particularly happy if that's the outcome. But certainly other scenarios could play out where you see overcoming of this leadership. But it's an entrenched one. Iran has a surveillance state. So again, it remains hard to conceive that in 4 to 5 weeks, if that's really the timeline that the United States stays to, that they can decimate that apparatus, that you can have the people led by truly secular leaders who are looking to have an open and free society, a democratic society. So I think anyone who predicts with certainty which sort of leader we're going to see in Iran is naive and is foolish. There's a wide gamut. There's a long continuum of different types of leadership that we could see, and it really does remain to be seen what will play out.
As we kind of wrap this up now here, Avi, as we think about this here in Ohio, based here in Northeast Ohio, this is something that's happening very far away. For someone who's trying to wrap their mind around this, what are the impacts here in the United States that will be felt from what's happening in Iran?
Yeah. I heard an account from an Iranian American, sort of counts herself as part of the Iranian diaspora. And she spoke quite movingly of being hopeful, right? That the change in leadership. And so, I think we have to be able to hold in our hands a variety of perhaps inconsistent truths. And so one is that there may indeed be holes in this leadership that has led to the loss of thousands of lives, loss of freedom, led to the exile. And yet it seems we have a war that has not been executed or planned or operated in either a thoughtful or legal fashion. And so what that outcome will be, I think obviously remains to be seen. I hope and pray that it will be a peaceful one, but I worry it's going to take some time, quite a bit of time before we're there.
That'll wrap up this conversation for today. Avi Cover, thank you for joining us, Director of the Institute for Global Security Law and Policy at Case Western Reserve University. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We'll take a break now, and when we come back, we'll remember an Akron television station that went dark 30 years ago. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. Stay with us. This is The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for staying with us. 30 years ago, Akron lost its only TV newsroom after struggling for years to compete with Cleveland television. WAKC was sold and the new owners dropped local programming. The close-knit staff from WAKC and WAKR Radio get together every year to reminisce about their time covering the Rubber City. IdeaStream Public Media's Kabir Bhatia visited their reunion in 2016 and came away with this audio postcard. That's a sample, that's for you here right now.
Hey, Akron, let's twist! Everybody's doing the WAKR twist.
My name's Chris Heiser. I was the 11 o'clock producer there. Just a tight-knit, us against the world mentality. I think you can see it was sort of a family atmosphere. I mean, where else are you going to see a bunch of people coming together to mark the day they were all let go from something?
Good evening, I'm Mark Williamson. It's been a long, hard fight by a group of Summit County citizens that believes the people have a right to vote on whether they want the piggyback sales tax they've been paying since May 18th. The citizens are fighting. Newsday has uncovered what appears to be a cheap imitation of the Cabbage Patch doll. And the scam involving it could be dangerous to you, your family. And
anchored for about 17 years. It was a locally owned ABC station that was old-fashioned, straightforward, retro TV news, what I call it. In a time when television news was becoming glamorized, and we just stuck with the brown paper bag with the generic label. I was actually doing traffic reports when Thurman Munson's plane went down. This really cool private jet flew right past us, and I'm in a Cessna 150. And I said to the pilot, I said, wow, what was that? Because our whole plane went like this. And about 12 minutes later, I saw smoke on the ground, and it was his plane. That probably had the biggest impact on me of anything.
My name is Mike Case. I eventually ended up being the weekend sports anchor. It was awesome. It was a dream come true. My best memory is the Indians finally got to go to the World Series. Amazing that the team that we had liked for so long that was so bad finally got to go, and that we were lucky enough to be a part of it. That was certainly the highlight for me.
David Strukel. I was an intern during my undergrad days at Bowling Green, and then I was hired as a sports producer. I got to interview Randy Macho Man Savage. So I think Phil tossed it down to me, and I said, hi, Dave Strukel. I'm live at the Food for Less in Massillon, Ohio with Randy Macho Man Savage. Huge display of Slim Jims. He said maybe 2 or 3 words and wrapped his hands around my neck and started choking me and shaking me. And I just said, Phil, back to you.
Phil Ferguson. I was a sports director.
The Force had a crucial game tonight up at the Richfield Coliseum, and we're getting very close to the 1988 Winter Olympics.
We kind of went off the air just when the city of Akron is starting to go the other way. You're talking about LeBron James, you're talking about the downtown development in Akron, the hotels being built, Canal Park, of course. So unfortunately, we went off the air just when things were starting to turn the corner for Akron.
Joanna Perino, and I started in 1987 interning. We did a few local public affairs kind of shows.
It was a video show, right?
I was the editor of that.
I'm Billy Soul. Join me live Monday through Friday, 7 to 8 p.m. for 23 Music Magazine on TV 23.
Did you ever have to edit a portion of the actual videos because maybe it was too racy for Channel 23?
No. But I did have to edit out Batman. If you watch it, it's more funny now that we're adults than when we were kids, because some of the innuendos in Batman were kind of sexual or adult themed.
Carl Bachtel started as an intern like many of the folks, morphed into full-time as a news photographer.
The story that really sticks out for you.
The big Methodist church fire across from the former Central Howard campus. We were the first on the scene. We beat the second alarm of fire crews there and stayed there the whole night. It was absolutely incredible. And the next morning, I had the opportunity to go up in the Goodyear blimp to cover the Soapbox Derby and get aerials of the burned out church.
I'm Eric Mansfield. It was my first internship in the summer of '89. That was one of the great things about the old Channel 23 was they would give people that first job. Old school, beat up cameras, small newsroom, but we competed every day against the Cleveland stations.
In Moscow, riot police remain on hand outside the Parliament building. Russian Vice President Alexander Rutskoy spent part of the day yelling to the crowd outside the building. Rutskoy has declared himself Russia's legitimate leader after Boris Yeltsin dissolved Parliament earlier this week. Inside, hardline opponents continue. Well, the charge against Torrance does specify alleged activity here near Washington Elementary. Police say they don't believe she actually sold to the students. What they do believe is that there's no mistaking her intentions here in the neighborhood. She's now set to begin on the National Inventors Hall of Fame to be built right here at the corner of Broadway Street and University Avenue. It's scheduled to open in the spring of 1995, more than 8 years after.
And I went out on a helicopter crash, and we have our one live truck, which was running on hamster power, I'm sure. And I'm there live next to Martin Savage, who's at CNN now. He's going live, and I'm 10 feet away. And of course, he's making 10 times what I'm making. I had a great producer who told me one time that the only difference between Cleveland News and Akron News is better shoes.
Hey, Akron, let's twist.
That's a sampling of memories from Akron's last TV newsroom, WAKC, which closed 30 years ago. You can find more, including videos from the station, at ideastream.org. And that'll close out our show for today. If you missed any part of today's show, you can listen to the Sound of Ideas podcast or watch the show on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. You can also hear a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU. To get the last word on today's topics, you can email us at soi@ideastream.org and find us on Instagram. You can send us a message or leave us a comment. We're at The Sound of Ideas. Yesterday, our audience weighed in during our segment on colorectal cancer, which is now the leading cause of cancer death for adults under 50. Stephanie wrote in, I was diagnosed at age 62. My first doctors from the related emergency room hospitalization had me headed for surgery. I got an alternative from a different hospital system for just radiation and chemotherapy. It absolutely worked, and I am still cancer-free. Get a second opinion before surgery. Also, the experience brought me back to God and the church, so it was well worth it. Thank you for sharing that story, Stephanie, and very happy to hear about that good outcome there. Tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas, we'll talk to consumer watchdogs about the top scams to be aware of, including new tricks using artificial intelligence. And you heard that tomorrow night is our next community tour. It is at capacity, but we are announcing today we will be live streaming the event. You can watch it, our conversation about the future of Burke Lakefront Airport, by going to our IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. That event is at 6 p.m. tomorrow night, coming to you from the airport. So if you did not get a chance to snag a ticket, you can check out that live stream again on our IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page starting at 6 p.m. And we had planned to bring you a conversation with Steve Litt today about Burke Lakefront Airport. We'll be bringing you that tomorrow ahead of the community tour. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for keeping the conversation going. We'll see you back here tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas.